Welcome to another edition of Biblical Errancy Commentary, the series that takes a critical look at Scripture, pointing out its numerous errors, contradictions, and fallacies. This program teaches a kind of Sunday school in reverse by giving you the biblical information that you should have heard but didn't. With millions of Americans fearing a totally one-sided presentation of the Bible, balance is greatly needed. Only when people are given both sides of an issue can a truly objective analysis be possible. And here to provide the alternative perspective is the editor of Biblical Errancy Newsletter, Mr. Dennis McKenzie.
Welcome to the 89th edition of Biblical Errancy Commentary. We're pleased you've joined us. Except for Jesus Christ, probably no biblical topic receives more attention than the Ten Commandments. From one end of Christendom to the other, they are constantly projected as basic rules for Christian attitudes and behavior. Yet, one of the most important commandments is violated on a regular basis by the overwhelming majority of those claiming to adhere to the Ten Commandments. In Exodus 28-11, the fourth commandment clearly states, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." Unquote. Except for some Sabbatarian groups, such as the Seventh-day Adventists, biblicist don't even go to church on the correct day. Saturday, not Sunday, is the Sabbath. And there is no substantive biblical support for calling Sunday, the first day of the week, the Sabbath. No valid biblical reason exists for shifting the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday, as occurred sometime during the post-apostolic period. Why the switch was made is a matter of speculation and of little concern to us. The fact that the alteration is in direct conflict with the fourth commandment is what matters. Arguments to the effect that Saturday, rather than another day, such as Sunday, should be honored as the Sabbath are clearly persuasive. Among the most potent are the following. First and most obvious is the fact that many verses clearly state that God made the seventh day, not the first day or just any day, the Sabbath. Exodus 31:15 says, 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is the Sabbath of rest, holy to the Lord. Exodus 29:10 says, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. Exodus 16:26 says, 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath, and then goes on to explain some more. And we could also cite Deuteronomy 5:14 and Leviticus 23:3. So obviously the seventh day and no other is the Sabbath. Second, another reason the seventh day should be honored is that many verses allege God rested from creating on the seventh day, not the first. Genesis 2:2-3 says, "On the seventh day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made, and God blessed the seventh day." Unquote. Exodus 20:11 says, "In 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." Unquote. Exodus 31:17, Hebrews 4:4, Exodus 34:21, Leviticus 23:8, and Deuteronomy 16:8 make the same point. The Sabbath was created as a memorial to God resting on the seventh day of creation, and couldn't be changed to the first day unless the whole process of creation was redone. In the fourth commandment, God specifically said the seventh day was to be kept holy. why would it have been placed in the Ten Commandments if it wasn't as important as the others and could be changed? The Ten Commandments were written on 2 tablets of stone, according to Deuteronomy 5:22, and by the finger of God, according to Exodus 31:18. How many biblical laws were deemed to be of such importance as to be permanently engraved in stone? Does that sound like they can be altered? Third, in addition to the 4th commandment, many other verses show that God specifically decreed that the Sabbath was to be honored. Ezekiel 20:20 says, "Hallow my Sabbaths, and they shall be a sign between me and you." Exodus 31:14 contends, "You shall keep the Sabbath therefore, for it is holy unto you. Everyone who defiles it shall surely be put to death." Unquote. And also note Isaiah 56:2 and 58:13-14. So the Sabbath was to be honored. Fourth, Jesus himself clearly honored the Sabbath, as is shown by Matthew 24:20, in which he says, "But pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day." And Luke 4:16 says, "As was his custom, Jesus went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read." Unquote. Fifth, Acts 13:44, 16:13, 17:1-4, 18:4, and 18:11 show that Paul also honored the Sabbath. Contrary to popular belief, the apostolic church continued to observe the seventh-day Sabbath after the death and resurrection of Christ. In fact, the book of Acts records 84 Sabbaths on which Paul and his associates held religious services. On the other hand, not one word in the entire Bible authorizes the keeping of any other day except Saturday. Paul preached on the Sabbath, as is shown by Acts 13:14-16, which says, "On the Sabbath, they," that is Paul and his company, "went into the synagogue and sat down. After reading of the law and the prophets, Paul stood up and said," and when it goes on to mention what he said, Acts 13:42 says, "People begged that these things might be told to them the next Sabbath." And that shows that the Gentiles asked that the same words be preached to them the next Sabbath. If the Sabbath had been changed, why did Paul's followers ask him to preach the following Saturday rather than on the very next day, Sunday? As the author of the pamphlet entitled Should the Seventh-Day Sabbath Be Observed said on page 13, quote, "The Gentiles besought that these words might be preached to them the next Sabbath." Did you catch that? There were Gentiles present as well as Jews, and they specifically asked Paul to preach the same sermon to them again the next Sabbath. Unquote. 6. Another fact showing that Saturday rather than Sunday should be honored as the Sabbath is that Jews and Christians all agreed on the appropriate day and never argued over the Sabbath in the first century. In all the charges brought against Paul, the Jews never accused him of violating the Sabbath. 7th, Isaiah 56:6-7 states, quote, "Foreigners who join themselves to the Lord and keep the Sabbath and do not profane it, will I bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful.